With God's help and through the prayers of the Holy Fathers, Holy Sophia Prayer House presents a video prepared on an Orthodox Christian topic. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a spiritually beneficial and fruitful viewing. Theology should serve the people, not the people theology. Author, Ion Kazariani. What do we want to say by this? We want to say the following. Often, when we indulge in theological discussions, we fail to notice the main thing. What is the calling of theology? The calling of theology is in service. The calling of theology is service. Theology should serve the people, the age-old/epic-old needs of the church. It should serve people. Theology should build bridges between generations, between which there is a mental and cultural difference, which has produced certain theological traditions. Theology is called to pave the way between the traditions of generations, to build bridges between eras, to give us a sound assessment of the past and hope for the future. Always and always, theology should offer us new ideas, new corrections. It should understand antiquity in the context of a new era and new data for an adequate understanding of this or that biblical event. Theology should serve the people, the modern church, the needs of modernity, and not preserve the tradition of ancestors who have long since passed away. The tradition of the ancestors played its positive role, responding to the challenges of a specific time and mentality, but this epical tradition cannot respond to the challenges of modernity or every new era, because each new epical challenge has a different face or a different meaning. The tradition of the ancestors should not only be transmitted, but also be IVSBOD, that is, clarified, corrected, because in this visible cosmos everything lives and moves and exists, because the source of the cosmos is God, who is alive. For in him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17 verse 28. Nothing in this world stands still. The cosmos is mobile. If theology no longer offers us new explanations without clarifying the previous tradition, it will become a museum archive, a showcase exhibit, and, accordingly, will not give us either fruit, life, or progress. Such a theology is like a lifeless doll, looking at which one can only enjoy, sympathize, play with, and nothing more. Because it is not alive, it is insensitive, it has no emotions, no feelings, no reactions, and as a result, a person soon gets tired of it. The same is true of theology. If it does not develop, it does not live, does not breathe, it is insensitive to the challenges of the era, but we create these eras with our emotions, mind, and energy. Christians create theology as a reaction to the action of God and the action of the world. But a conservative theology has neither meaning nor life, and one can say about such a theology that, with the advent of modernity and its challenges, it is inactive and powerless. Such an inactive theology is already worshipped and served by man himself as an idol, and this is typical of KRPTQVNISMCMLBA. However, it should be completely different. Man should not worship and serve theology, but theology should serve man. For the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath, Mark 2 verse 27. But, unfortunately, our current conservative theological myopia cannot distinguish between the dangers looming on the event horizon, many of which have already come to the door of our society. All of this is because we live in the past, and dreaming about the past will not allow us to develop in the future. If theology no longer plays the living role to which it was originally called, it will degenerate. If theology fails to assess the challenges of modernity sensibly, it gradually loses its strength. Such a theology is barren, unable to develop the youth of the next generation, who will ask intelligent and important questions related to cosmology and anthropology. Let us translate this example into the language of genetics, which is so popular among the modern educated population. Such a theology will not bear fruit over time. It will not be able to genetically replicate and renew its genetic information. Such a theology is not genetically resistant to the environment in which it was supposed to develop. Such a theology will over time produce more pseudogenes that cannot provide a healthy heritage and strong offspring. Such a genome is disastrous. Such a genetic heritage will be powerless and will eventually cease. Such an organism, as a carrier of genetic errors with a high percentage, cannot develop. The DNA of our theology is our holy or non-holy ancestors, who handed down to us what they themselves created. One ecumenical council confirmed another, and not only confirmed, but also supplemented what was not said by the previous council for various epochal reasons. It clarified the creeds of the previous council. This was a completely healthy reaction. This speaks of the sensitivity and progressiveness of the Fathers in the eras of time. But what are we doing today? We are doing the opposite of the Holy Fathers. If the Holy Fathers responded to the challenges of their time and did not seek advice in the past, but gave their ideas and their explanations and dogmatic clarifications, that is, they did not change the dogmas, but clarified them, we are preserving their ideas. The Fathers did not look back. They solved the problems facing them themselves. They did not preserve the ideas of their predecessors, but rather these ideas and thoughts ACC shall be dinian, and the future GADAS dinian. Unfortunately, we preserve these ideas of ours, while today the Church faces much more challenges than before, because the world has become more complicated, technologically smarter, more sophisticated, and man has decided that he can live and exist without God. God is not an envious tyrant. He gives us freedom and answers through the mouth of human theologians, but today theology in the East is silent, and with this silence preserves the tradition of the Fathers, who cannot answer the problems of the 21st century. Our silence today means that we do not have the synergistic ability to speak to God. This is synergistic timidity. The absence of a healthy and adequate theological response produces two things. One, insensitivity to modernity, to the problems of modernity, and even irresponsibility to a certain extent. Two, a similar response. And it must be said that it is completely symmetrical and adequate to the faith on the part of secular modernity, which is devoid of any interest in church reality and, moreover, in backward theology. This is a path to nowhere. This is an aporia, and we ourselves in the East have created this aporia. Such a theology contributes to the destruction of already collapsed bridges between cultures and generations. We ourselves do nothing, with a few exceptions, and judge those who act and speak from the perspective of modern evolutionary theology, biological or cosmic. Compare Matt 23:13, Luke 11 verse 52. We are concretizing the medieval tradition, and we do not understand that it worked and was effective in the era for which it was created, and that today such a theology cannot have power in cosmology, biology, and other disciplines. If the Fathers touched on biology, they used the data of natural science that they had at hand. They did not have other data. For example, St. John Chrysostom truly believed that art, cities, etc. are the result of the fall of man through sin, and that biological death introduced this into human life.
RG 48.
Colonel 545, he also believed that before the curse, there were no birth pangs, and Basil the Great believed that a fly is an animal that is born from dung.
RG 30.
Colonel 468. The same saint according to John Chrysostom, biological decay is the result of human sin, PG 60, Colonel 530. And here we ask the question, how can we today rely on such ancient and medieval data in their theological understanding? Based on today's knowledge, the Holy Fathers were poorly versed in natural science, but well versed in it for their time, and did not know that birth pangs are an evolutionary reality, and that our unintelligent animal ancestors were in this reality, and that animals are in the same reality today. Or how can we speak of their knowledge in the field of anthropology without reinterpreting their Christological biology / anthropological knowledge for modernity? We know that decay and death, not in the spiritual sense, of course, have nothing to do with some kind of fall into sin of man, but are conditioned by the mechanisms of pure biological evolution that arose after abiogenesis. That is, we are talking directly about biological decay and death. Therefore, we should not and cannot deify the Fathers, and we should not consider their every word as dogma. Moreover, the same Basil the Great has very interesting natural scientific ideas, for example, about the speed of light, PG.29, Colonel 45. But this was intuitive knowledge, and this knowledge could not be verified as accurately as today. Modern natural science confronts us with the fact of the evolution of nature, which we have no moral right to deny, because all academic science that concerns biology and cosmology is based on evolution. Medicine takes into account biological evolution. The drugs we take are tested and approved on animals in the context of our knowledge of biological evolution, in terms of our and animals' identical biochemistry. Our immune system is built on the basis of our body's evolutionary development and centuries, millions of years, of fighting viruses. Our theology must be in tune with the achievements of science, and it has a moral obligation to do so. The South African scientist, cosmologist, professor of theoretical physics, and theologian George F.R. Ellis writes, "The task of the theologian is to find an interpretation of tradition that will inspire confidence, for which the value of all received knowledge, including historical and scientific knowledge, is obvious. Without this value, the theological tradition cannot enjoy trust and seriousness in modern educated society." Do we want such a theology without future trust? Probably not, and you will agree with me in this. Theology must guide us in the right directions, provide an adequate vector, and offer alternatives to modern society. It must speak the same language with it, or at least it must try to do so. In their time, it was precisely the Cappadocians, Basil and the two Gregories, and Amphilochius of Iconium, and the Alexandrians, Origen and Clement, who did this. They adapted Christianity to the language and terminology of Greek philosophy and were able to speak to the highly educated Greek elite in their highly intellectual language. And this was wonderful. The Alexandrians continued the excellent theological traditions of ancient Alexandria. In Alexandria, pre-Christian pagan sophists interpreted the will of the gods in an allegorical sense in order to bring the myths into line with the norms and understanding of their time, which was later adopted by Christian thinkers and repeated within the framework of evangelical theology. Thus, the Alexandrian allegorical interpretation is born. Moreover, it does not matter whether it was Greek, Jewish, or Christian hermeneutics, it was allegorical. At the time of the birth of the first church, the most famous apostle, Paul, explained Christianity in categories understandable to the Greek philosophers, using the ideas and terms of their rich philosophical heritage. On the one hand, he quoted Epimenides, Aratus of Cilicia, Aristotle, and others. On the other hand, in his Gospel Kerygma, he widely used the oral Talmudic heritage of the ancient Jewish sages. Paul spoke in the terms of his time, relying on the preceding tradition, although he perfected it. Paul did not stand still, but boldly proposed a new understanding of the truths of the Old Testament. So, what is wrong with us today? Why are we not worthy imitators of our ancestors? Why do we become complex and stuck in the past? What prevents us from understanding the traditions of the past and understanding them in a new way? Today, we are prevented from doing so by the shadow of medieval phobias of God and Christ, or loss of divinity. This shadow of medieval theological remnants does not allow our theological thought to progress. We are afraid of losing the Son of God in the Son of Man. We often say that we are free, but where is this freedom of thought? Where is this theological freedom? Where is the freedom of biblical studies? Where is this theological progress when we have abandoned all positions in the face of growing scientific thought and cannot give adequate answers to those who ask questions? We should be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope you have. 1 Peter 3 verse 15. And in order to be ready, we must at least be able to think in the categories of the modern world, that is, to think as the modern educated world thinks. Without understanding the world, without trying to understand the modern world, theology has no chance of being listened to. Theological dualism cannot save us. We cannot accept evolution and at the same time remain in the medieval theological perspective of cosmology and biology, hamartology. We cannot serve God and mammon, Matthew 6 verse 24. Who is ready today to give biologists, from the perspective of theological understanding, an answer to the questions of human origin and development? Or who is ready to give physicists a theological answer to the questions of cosmic inflation and singularity? Who can give these answers to a person interested in science, for whom these answers are important, if only because he wants to live in Ariel Yar and not in a world created by medieval ideas? Modern theology is morally obliged to develop certain rules that would help a person in the correct interaction with the achievements of science. By creating such rules, we will give a believing person the opportunity to think in a wide range. This will give a person an incentive to know this world in all its manifestations and fullness of cosmic beauty. First of all, it will be interesting for scientists themselves who are inclined to faith. By creating such rules, a person will not be limited by these rules. On the contrary, he will realize his freedom of thought, which is immanent to a person as in who seeks and knows this world and its divine source. Such obedience to law is not a restriction of freedom, but rather its condition, as Pope Benedict XVI well notes. A free-thinking person will be truly free and not locked in visions of the past. The past should not haunt us like a ghost of medieval phobias. We should respect medieval theology, but we should move forward. We thank the fathers for their heroism and theological achievements of the past, but they should be the basis and stimulus for us to further develop these achievements. This is precisely how we will prove that we are worthy successors of their work. When we often talk about 2,000 years of Christian theology, we should not forget at the same time that this theology was not static and stagnant, but was mobile. The Georgian nation is not numerous. Our country is small. We are among geographical empires, and in order to survive in this world full of fierce and intellectual competition, we need free thinking. We have always fought for our independence, and what is independence? First of all, this is the right of T vsufeld da0 vnbi. Without this, we will not be able to move forward. Evolution is the driving force of the species and the cosmos. Biological evolution and natural selection are not over. This selection has moved to a more intellectual level. The mode has changed, but it exists, has remained, and will always be as long as man exists as a thinking and intelligent animal, as Homo sapiens. We must withstand tough competition in the battle of these worlds and civilizations. Our theological thought will make a positive contribution to the development of our nation, just as it has always had its positive accents throughout Christian history. In the history of enlightened Europe, theological thought played a very important role. It became the driving force of science, because Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and many others tried to substantiate the divine origin of the cosmic order in their knowledge, Theologia Naturalis. Thus, theology, to a certain extent, was the driving force of scientific thought. If we consider ourselves part of enlightened Europe, we are morally obliged to resuscitate our preserved theology. Humanity has already begun to master space and has become an orbital spaceship, and in the future it will become an interplanetary species. The future of humanity is connected with a post-humanistic perspective. It is unthinkable without cybernetics, and in the future we will have to understand all this theologically. But who will do this? Who will help the nation understand how to correctly and adequately evaluate the events in the life of a changing humanity? So, let's take from theology all the best that it has created. A nation always needs free thought. Free theological thought is needed, and the future itself will filter out everything superfluous from it and leave all the necessary elements. The reception of future history, like molecular evolution, will itself filter out unnecessary genes in this theology and preserve only those that will prove to be sustainable in this harsh world of competition. It goes without saying that our theology is visible in the spiritual fruit of our elders/elders. First, the spiritual growth of the elders is not based on medieval theology, but on their personal evangelical merit. Second, these elders are very few, and Christ called them to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this was the Savior's last earthly desire, Matthew 28 verses 19 to 20. How can we preach the theology of the 5th or 14th century to the modern world in the field of cosmology or anthropology? Such a theology is uncompetitive, uninteresting, boring. Such a theology is stagnant and can no longer fulfill the necessary role for mass Christianity. Such a theology is not mass, but is for the chosen ones. Christ, Matthew 28 verses 19 to 20, calls us precisely to mass, not selective Christianity. Thus, a conservative theology, which is accepted by a small circle of believers, can no longer be understood in terms of the preaching of Christ to the whole world. Therefore, talking about the fruit of our elders is meaningless in the sense of mass Christianity. Christ died for everyone. We must speak to the modern world in a language that it understands. Finally, we would like to emphasize once again, no one who has a sound mind and analytical thinking will idealize the Holy Fathers of ancient times and consider their every word as dogma. We are grateful to them, we accept the tradition, clarify its scope in the light of the challenges of our modern era, and pass it on to future generations. We should not be idealists, we should be RELSDBI. We should understand that we are responsible for the current generation and the current state of affairs, which will bear fruit in the future if we correctly use our freedom, which, as a talent, God gave us, and we should not plant this talent in the ground like a talent, as in the well-known gospel parable, but we should give this talent the opportunity to replicate in divine inspiration. Theology should be realistic, not idealistic, because we live in a real-time regime, and not in the past, because living in the past means not having a future, and not in an ideal time regime. Ideal, time, more precisely, timelessness, leads us to the eschatological perspective of the kingdom of heaven, where God may be all in all. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 28. Therefore, theology should serve the people, not the people theology, because the people are the church, and therefore theology serves the church, that is, the people for whom Christ was crucified. The source S translated by docs.google.com. Apologues for any errors. Hagia Sophia Chapel. May God bless you. Thank you for your attention. You have watched a video presented by Holy Sophia Prayer House. Please subscribe to the channel so that it may become more successful and its work may serve good and beneficial purposes even more effectively. May God help and bless you.